powerful minority is on the rise with a particular vision of America.
You cannot separate God from politics. You can't take him out of our government.
I believe that God specifically placed his hand on Donald J. Trump of New York City and said, you're the fighter that I need, and you're going to save the soul of this nation that I inspired the founding. And God bless him for that.
Christianity is the foundation upon which the United States was built those many centuries ago. These days, despite still being a majorly Christian nation, you wouldn't be out of your mind to suggest that most Americans and the nation as a whole barely showcase the values of Christianity. But why should being Christian matter anyway? Are these so-called Christian values even that important to the prosperity of a nation? Also, what have been the effects of their supposed decline in American society? In this video, we shall dive into how Christian sentiment has impacted America and American society. Stay tuned, and in God we trust. Or do we? By nearly every definition, America is a Christian nation. With over 210 million of its citizens identifying with the religion, around 70% of the United States is Christian. This makes the US the country with the largest Christian population in the world. That means they should be the most Christian nation on earth, right? Well, wrong. But we'll get to that in a moment. The American Christian population is split into different denominations, with the Protestants making up the majority of the population with over 140 million people, or about 42% of the Christian population. They are followed by the Roman Catholics, who number around 70 million, or about 21% of the population. Other smaller denominations of Christianity, such as the Eastern and Oriental Orthodox Christians, the Latter-day Saints, and Jehovah's Witnesses, make up the rest of the Christian population. With such large proportions of citizens, it's safe to say no religion has made as much of an impact on American society as Christianity. But to fully understand its impact, we need to go all the way back to the beginning when Europeans first arrived on the American shores. Before we proceed, if you're enjoying the video and want to see more like it, please endeavor to hit the like button or subscribe button. Now, back to the video. When Christopher Columbus and his crew first arrived in the Americas in 1492, there was no intention by the Spanish crown to convert the land into a Christian colony. They arrived to these shores by mistake, and even after the continent's vast riches were discovered, the initial focus was on extracting those resources rather than establishing a sort of territorial oversight using religion. That would all change when the French became interested in what Europeans were considering a burgeoning new world with vast opportunities. With more settlers arriving, both the French and the Spanish began establishing colonies across the Americas. This came with the establishment of towns and more specifically missions with the aim of converting the Native American population. The Spanish were particularly invested in the spread of Christianity and established missions in towns located in present-day Texas, New Mexico, California, Florida, and Arizona. Their aggression towards this process may have been a result of the nearly 7-century-long territorial war with the Muslim Moors, which was called the Reconquista and ended the same year Columbus discovered the Americas. Fun fact: many cities and towns where the Spanish established missions have retained their names to this day. One example is the city of Los Angeles, whose full legal name is actually El Pueblo de la Nuestra Señora Reina de Los Angeles del Rio Porquencuela, or the Town of Our Lady, Queen of the Angels of the Porquencuela River. As crazy as this may sound, LA was actually founded by Franciscan friars, who named their small church and eventually the town that formed around it after the Virgin Mary, also known to Catholics as Our Lady, Queen of the Angels. In the early 17th century, British men and women fleeing religious persecution in the oppressive Europe also increasingly began to settle in America, bringing with them Anglicanism and Protestantism. Pilgrims and Puritans who wished to reform the Church of England were part of the Protestant group and established colonies of their own.
The Puritans of New England thought of themselves as a kind of chosen nation. Certainly in the 19th century, there was a sense of manifest destiny that God had ordained the nation to move to the West Coast and even in some cases to move throughout all of North America.
For the rest of the 17th century, the various forms of Christianity continued to spread with the arrivals of the German and Dutch, and even the Russians who made it to Alaska and brought the Eastern Orthodox faith with them remains to this day. However, the spread of Christianity in the Americas was often at the expense of the native population, and that trend would continue up until the American Revolution. Following the end of the American Civil War, most of the Christian denominations had taken up new forms but remained Christian. and from the spoils of war came the historic declaration of America's independence on the 4th of July, 1776. At the core of his separation from British rule was the Christian values of the men whose father and grandfathers had escaped religious prosecution from Europe's oppressive religious policies. Indeed, a majority of 56 signatures on the Declaration of Independence were Christian men, and there were multiple references to God in the document. This set the tone for the development of the United States based on Christian values, and the impact of this was clear for all to see. Let's see a few examples of them. The impact of Christianity on the United States extends as far back as its discovery. For instance, many of the individuals who arrived on the shores were Christian scientists, philosophers, and inventors who were fleeing the oppressive monarchies of Europe, who often frowned upon the development of any discovery, ideology, or invention that would put their powers under threat. What that meant was that some of the brightest minds in Europe found themselves in close proximity to a new land with more freedom of expression. This resulted in some of humanity's greatest discoveries and inventions that advanced the productivity of not just America but the entire world, even to this day. As mentioned earlier, before their independence, the American society had already begun to be built around Christianity, and this was evident in their colonial currencies. The Carolina cent, which was minted in 1694, bore the inscription, "God preserve Carolina and the Lord's proprietors," and the New England cent was also inscribed with, "God preserve New England." The trend had already been set, so when the time came in 1857 to design a new coin to represent the dollar and finally replace all the other legal tenders accepted in the United States at the time, the motto that was to be engraved onto the coin was obviously going to showcase Christian values. Following a series of proposals in the early 1860s by President Abraham Lincoln's director of Mint, James Pollard, a new motto was finally chosen for the American currency on the 9th of December, 1863, "In God We Trust." Sound familiar? Fun fact, "In God We Trust" may have first appeared on United States currency in 1863, but it wasn't until the 30th of July 1956 that it was declared the U.S. national motto by the 84th Congress in a unanimous vote. In doing so, it replaced "E Pluribus Unum" as the de facto official motto, and has featured on every dollar coin or note since 1957. Away from currency, Christianity also influenced the early development of early American society as it helped form the educational system. Indeed, out of the 123 original colony universities and colleges, all but one were faith-based schools, and the text that they used for teaching English was the Bible. Minor fun fact, renowned Ivy League colleges like Princeton and Harvard and Yale actually began as schools of theology. The civil rights movements, led by the likes of Martin Luther King Jr. in the mid-1900s, also had their roots based on the teachings of Christianity, reminding the people that God had also granted people of color the right to be treated as human beings, just as it was written in the Declaration of Independence. For over 2 centuries, Christianity was fundamental to American society and helped shape the American landscape for generations to come with the concepts of freedom and equality, teaching the message that all people have value regardless of their gender, ethnicity, and socioeconomic background. However, even if some of these values remain, Christianity in America almost certainly hasn't, and even the numbers prove that Christendom is on the decline. But by how much? Let's find out. Alan Watts quote,
"Possible to follow the way of Christ. Many a Christian has admitted it. I am a miserable sinner."
Recent findings from the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University found a growing decline in Christian beliefs and church attendance.
Despite the strong number of Christian-identifying citizens today, the percentage of Americans who are Christian has been on a steady decline for decades now. Just about a decade ago in 2015, the percentage of Christian-identifying Americans was 75%. In 2001, that figure was 81.6%, and a decade prior to that, the figure was 85%. Fun fact, the American Almanac and Repository of Useful Knowledge estimated that in 1831, there was 12.1 million members and adherents of various Christian denominations in America, with the population of the U.S. that year estimated at 13.3 million. That means a whopping 91% of the population was involved in churches at the time. A far cry from the 41% who say they still attend churches weekly today. Another fun fact, with 51% of its population reporting that they attend church weekly, Utah is America's most religious state. At the other end is Vermont with only 17% of its population attending weekly. The decline of Christianity isn't expected to slow down either, and Pew Research Center projected in a 2022 study that Christians could make up less than half of the American population by 2070, with estimates falling between 35% and 46%. Churches are already being closed by the dozens each year as they continue to lose members.
Last time, I'm confident we might get there today. I wonder, it'd be quite interesting just to get a feel of the room, actually. How many people here are Christians? Is that the time? Okay, well, it looks like I've got my work.
This decline in religiousness has coincided with the rise of individualism in American society that has been seen especially since the end of World War II. Sweeping changes occurred around the world as a result of that war, and fewer societies in the West centered their progress around religion. Globalization, multiculturalism, and secularism became the order of the day. The development of media and communication technologies such as the television, the internet, and more recently smartphones allowed these new ideologies to spread far and wide, and more people found out that they could become whatever they wanted without having to adhere to any religious standard. On one hand, you could say the decline of Christendom hasn't affected America. The country has grown to become the most productive nation in world history, after all. On the other hand, conservative people could say the decline has increasingly impacted American society negatively. But how?
The philosophical things underneath give rise to all of this stuff, a disassociation of man from God and liberty, a disassociation of the purpose of sex and procreation, a disassociation of the differences between masculine and feminine.
If you ask many non-Americans and even some conservative Americans, they would tell you that the US is devolving into a cesspit of hedonism and that liberalism may have gone a few steps too far. Now, that may be an over-exaggeration, but some people actually believe it. That's because of the messages large American media conglomerates choose to portray in movies, branding, and on the news. The rise of social media has also made it easy for these so-called secular ideologies to spread across the globe, and some countries with more conservative leaders aren't happy with its effect on their people, especially their young people. Whether the spread of US secularism is harming America and the rest of the world is subjective, but you could hardly argue with people who believe that some of the highly controversial policies discussed in the US could only arise from its encouragement of secularism. Ultimately, the decline of Christian values hasn't affected the prosperity of the average American. So how is it perceived by the world will remain subjective, even if some individuals may try to link it as a catalyst for the collapse of modern civilization. The final question to ask is, with this shift in ideology, is there a long-term future for Christianity in the United States?
Losing ground across the Western world. Society is being transformed, and the momentum seems to be unstoppable.
An economic prosperity and a functional government become staples of the American society, and church participation has become an optional activity for individuals and families to do. Because unlike for the early settlers, the church isn't responsible in any way for the well-being of the American citizen. Additionally, living in an increasingly cosmopolitan and multiracial democracy means that Americans are more likely to confront someone who doesn't share their religious beliefs, so the divisive nature of many religious groups often make younger generations prefer not to take up any religious practices, even if they do identify under a religion.
Process of generational replacement, where older people who are more religious die out, and they're replaced in the population by younger people coming up behind.
Countries in Latin America and Africa are currently not experiencing the same decline, although that is mostly because the church still offers broad social support services in those places. Right now, it is expected that the increasing numbers of Christians in what is referred to as the Global South will result in a new Christendom where the majority of the world's Christian population will be found in the South. As for the future of Christianity in America, it will decline, that's for sure. That trend is on a global scale aside from the South. However, with continued migration and the significant rise of Christian nationalism in American politics,
desire to live in a Judeo-Christian nation with Judeo-Christian values.
It claims Christianity is under attack and that God belongs in government. With past
Christianity in America could easily remain strong for a few more generations and could even experience something of a renaissance if those doomsayers' beliefs of a potential collapse of modern civilization comes to pass. Whenever that would happen, though, is anyone's guess. The impact of Christianity on America cannot be understated, because it played a huge role in why the nation has become a global superpower. Individual values may be on the decline, but it may just be the natural phase of a cycle, which was itself created by Christianity. But what do you think? Do Americans need to regain their Christian values, or is the world past the need for them? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, and remember, a person who does not know his past has no future.